Hi, and welcome back to my channel and our study of the book of Joshua. Now, we finished our last video with a quick overview, and it was very quick and rushed, of the parceling out of the land, as we can read in chapters 14 to 19, and how the different tribes were given the land in which they were to inherit and to live, including, of course, to Caleb and to Joshua, those faithful men, the faithful ones who had lived their lives in full devotion to God, as we explored in our last video. Now, if you haven't yet watched that video, I'm going to leave a quick link here. I'm not sure which corner it's in, but yep. And in the link in the description as well, so that you can go back and have a look at that. Now, in the video to come, which is actually quite a shorter one, I'm going to talk about the cities of refuge and what that meant for those who were to inhabit those, and how those point to Jesus, because I think that's a really important thing to kind of get a sense of. How do we find Jesus in the book of Joshua and the cities of refuge? Beautiful expression of that in the book. And I want to discuss very briefly also the conflict that you find in chapter 22, because it seems like a really odd one to have that sort of sitting in there as they're kind of getting into the land and starting to settle in, and suddenly this conflict happens. And it's really an indication of what was to come. So I'll talk a bit about that. Now, I think what was really sad in that last video when we ended was the indication that they didn't clear the land. We read over and over again, and they did not drive out the Canaanites. And it led them to compromise and synchronism, and yeah, there were things there that it set the scene. And that's something that we're going to talk about in the book of Judges when I cover the book of Judges. I'm going to cover that over the next two videos as I explore that book, Judges, and also the book of Ruth, because there's a light and darkness there, a darkness and a lightness there, because Ruth is that beautiful. It's a moment of lightness in a time of darkness that we find in in the book of Judges, sorry. However, now let's get on with our video and let's have a look at the cities of refuge. So we come then to Joshua 20, and we've got the cities of refuge, and you can also read about this in Numbers 35, and we see that the cities were appointed by God himself, and they were given to provide shelter from the avenger. They were placed on a height. All right, when you read about them, you read that they were always placed up high on a mountain or a hill, so that it could be readily seen from all around. Just think about, the light on a hill. We think about Jesus, the light on the hill. There were easy access to the cities, a number of gates that people could come into. The roads leading up to them were clear. The cities offered protection from an avenger, okay, but only... Right, note this well, only for accidental homicide. It's not if you intended to murder someone, then it wasn't. It was only if you accidentally murdered someone. And the detail of that is covered in Numbers 35. Now, the ones that were receiving shelter had to remain in that city until the trial. Okay, they were not allowed to leave, because as soon as they left the city, if they even went out of the gate, then they could be taken by the avenger. It was available to the Gentiles and the Jews. Okay, God did not make a distinction here. We see again that promise of the future. And it was the death of the high priest that secured the full and final deliverance. So when the high priest died, that is when they would be released. So that's quite an amazing. Again, it's a foreshadowing of what was to come. The death of the high priest who would release us from sin. Isn't that incredible? Just like all the way through, we see these little foreshadowings of the coming of Jesus. So I just love the visual of that, and knowing what we know now with hindsight, and seeing how God was already promising what Jesus would accomplish on the cross for us. So let's have a look at these cities of refuge, because there's a little bit more that we can learn about them. And I've got this map here. It's a little bit unclear, I'm sorry. But I just wanted to kind of show you how they were distributed. And I think you can see that because we see here the land of Israel and how the tribes were divided. If you have a look. So Israel went right up here. Here we see Manasseh. You can see he got quite a large land. But just so that you're aware that a lot of this is mountain. And then we have Gad, and he actually talks about that, okay, that a lot of this is mountain and he wants a little bit more. So he wants a better land, which is what he gets here. So we get Manasseh, we get Gad, we get down here Reuben, and you see the other lands that are bordering around them, Moab and Edom. This is the land of Simeon and Judah. We see Dan. Dan was one of the first ones, to lose his land because he failed to get rid of the people in his lands, which is very sad. And the Philistines, and in fact it wasn't until David came that we see the Philistines finally being defeated. Then we see Shechem here and Kadesh up here. This is Naphtali, by the way. We see Asher here. So anyway, so this is the land. This is Benjamin. So we see the land here and how that was actually divided. This is fairly standard look at how they were all there. But what I love about this is the way that these cities, the names of these cities, and have a look at what they mean. Kadesh means holy. Remember that these are cities of refuge, right? So Shechem means shoulder. Hebron means fellowship. Bezer means a fortified place. Ramoth, a height of exaltation. Remember, these were all on the heights, right? Golan means joy. And yes, Golan, that's the Golan Heights, by the way. This is where the current modern Golan Heights are. But the Golan that you will find on the map now is not this Golan, okay? Because that's just a kibbutz that was built after the 1967 war, which has nothing to do with anything here. But just so that you know, this is where that is. So, but Golan itself means joy. And so when you look at the cities of refuge and you think about what they mean, and you think what they might mean for the people who were escaping to these places, it is just beautiful. We've come now to the spiritual cities. Remember that the Levites were not to inherit any land, but they were to get spiritual cities. Now this is really important to understand this, and we'll see this when we come to the book of Judges. The spiritual cities were spread right throughout all the tribes of Israel, okay? So there were 48 of them, 4 in each tribe, and this is really important because God was setting up a theocracy. Okay, I'm going to come back to that thought in a minute, so just watch out for that. But God was setting up a theocracy where he would govern through the priests, and so he'd set up these tribes. Every tribe would have 4 cities where the Levites and the priests would live. 13 of these cities were to go to the priests, and now that included the 6 cities, okay, of refuge. They were part of that allotment. So the cities of refuge were not governed by the people. They were governed by the Levites and the priests, okay? So by the priests themselves, in fact. So the priests were, so you can see that link again to the priests and the cities of refuge being governed by the priests. So again, that beautiful connection there. Now, the spiritual cities, okay, the priests were to be a tangible picture of replacing the pagan places of worship. So that's why it was important that there were 4 and they were spread right throughout all the tribes. They were a tangible picture of replacing the pagan places of worship with truth and obedience to the one true God. They were dispersed throughout all the land, so the people would always be conscious of and be aware of the very presence of God and his laws and teachings, because that was the rule, that was the job of the Levites and the priests, was to keep that in the forefront through the festivals and the celebrations, the 7 feasts. They were to remind the people on a consistent basis that to worship God and to come into his presence. The importance What it shows you is that importance of the unifying spiritual leadership that the Levites had in the community. And of course, it foreshadows the New Testament church, the spiritual community that we have, and the role that we should be playing as witnesses to our community. Our church should be a witness at all times to our community, in the same way that the priests and the cities were to be a witness to their community. We as a church are to be a witness to our community. So there's that echo there again that we see between what we see in the Old Testament, what God had put in place, and what we have now. So rather exciting. And now, unfortunately, we come to a part in Judges that is perhaps not as spiritually great, really. And yet there is a lesson that we can learn from this, okay? And we come to a house divided. So when that unity that we see here at the unifying spiritual leadership, the unity that we see with the people of Israel, when Joshua releases the half tribe of Manasseh and Gad and Reuben to go back over to the other side of the land, it's like they're almost like they're divided, like there becomes a division, a thinking division inside and in the people, and we see here that unity is compromised in a way. The major conquest is now over, and the unifying forces of the conquest is over. They've enjoyed this season of peace, and this is where that loss of unity causes the people to go their own way. Okay, and that's where this misunderstanding occurs, and we see a rumor that is given birth. So in the story of the Israelites who settled on the east bank of the Jordan, and we're going to give it some attention for this reason, because Joshua allowed some of the tribes, because they settled there, as long as they would always fight, all right, with the other tribes to secure the land. But once that fight was over, they went back to their own hand. So Joshua's concern was all along that they would drift. Okay, so he encouraged them with some instructions. They would set up altars to remind themselves of the ties to the tribes of the west, and they did that. But the tribes of the west got word of their altar building, and then they immediately actually assumed the worst, that they were altars to false gods, which of course, as we know, as we read, was not true. But this is the rumor that started. And then through that priestly intervention, they actually gathered up the armies. They were going to go fight. But through priestly intervention, Phinehas steps in, another leader of the people. He actually steps in, and that civil war is diverted. And this is what can happen, but because Phinehas steps in because he seeks out the truth. And this is what can happen when we don't seek out the truth. Okay? The Western tribes, they became hungry for action. They wanted to go in, and it's interesting that they wanted to go in and force judgment on the eastern tribes, but yet they hadn't actually cleansed out the Canaanites and the other tribes from their own land, which is, that's just like, yeah. Anyway, but war was averted because Phinehas stepped in. So what can we learn from that? Well, first of all, don't discourage. Never discount rumor. We do need to listen to it, okay? But we need to check it out like Phinehas did, intentionally, all right? But peaceably. We need to keep our emotions under control. Don't het up and just get, anxious and emotive and start, going down rabbit holes and spreading the rumor around. But keep those emotions under control and seek out the truth. Okay, so seek out the truth calmly. And then talk frankly about the rumors. But always put that truth on the table. All right, this is really important in terms of what we see in the church today. I cannot stress this enough. So, and then be a peacemaker. Like Phinehas, just be that peacemaker. Peace undergirded with truth is the highest goal that we can have. No compromise when truth, but there is no compromise. Sorry, there is no compromise when truth substantiates the rumors. Okay, don't compromise on it. If you find out that it's true, that they have that the rumor is true, then you need to deal with it. But in the event where it isn't true, you need to, be a peacemaker. So there we have the lessons that we can learn from that episode in their journey. So thank you for joining me today, and I really hope you found something to take home with you. I hope you kind of really got a sense of how to find Jesus in this important book, how there are moments in each of these books that point forward to the coming Savior. Of course, the people of the time didn't really realize that. They didn't see that the God of history was preparing them for something momentous and important. But they worshipped the God of history, and they understood it in their moment and in their time. We, this side of the cross, of course, can look back and see how the God of history prepared the land, prepared the people, and prepared for us an understanding of who Jesus would be for us today. Now, the book of Joshua, it ends with a farewell speech, as I mentioned in my first video. And in that speech, Joshua actually reminds the Israelites of where they have come from. He goes through and he gives them a little review of their history. He reminds them of their heritage, and he reminds them most of all to worship the Lord. And then in chapter 24, he leads them in that beautiful moment of covenant renewal, where in chapter 24, verse 15, he himself declares that as for me and my house, we will worship the Lord. Though we know very sadly that they won't stick to it. But the people do respond in kind, and they say in verse 16, and in fact they say a couple of times, and I've got it right here in front of me, the people replied, "We will certainly not abandon the Lord to worship other gods." See that firm declaration that they make. And later on again, the people go, "No," verse 21, the people answered Joshua, "We will worship the Lord." And then Joshua calls them to be witnesses against themselves, and they say, "We are witnesses." So there's this huge declaration that they make to stick with God and to worship him and to worship him only. And that's a challenge I think I want to leave you with today, is to make that firm declaration like Joshua. As for me and my house, I will worship the Lord. And of course, at this side of the cross, we have God's Holy Spirit to help us, because the laws of God are now written on our hearts, and he is there to lead us, to guide us, to help us to walk along and to walk alongside us and to keep us walking with Jesus as we go. So once again, I want to thank you for joining me, and I look forward to having you join me again next week as we continue our exploration through this period of the Bible, that the early settlement before the kings. And blessings.